still following me? Do I have to scream?
Sorry. I'll wait here.
Silent Hill. The name hardly requires an introduction. Resident Evil's artsier, angstier sister, Silent Hill is one of the defining pillars of the survival horror genre, and it stands apart from the Resident Evil series with a distinct tone, atmosphere, and playstyle. A YouTube series on Silent Hill isn't exactly revolutionary. The games have been let's played and analyzed and theorized until the demonic dogs come home. But in all of this content about the cult, the nature of the game's supernatural elements, the symbolism, and so on, I feel like most people have lost sight of the most important part of these games. People are missing the forest for the fog-shrouded trees. What actually makes the great Silent Hill games great, and how the less great ones fail. Let me start off by sharing how I personally got into the series and what it means to me. I promise it's highly relevant to the point I'm going to make. This is the series that got me into horror. Period. When I was a little kid, I was kind of a wimp and stayed away from anything scary. When I got a little older, although I developed an appreciation for the scary elements in other genres, I still didn't care much for horror as a genre by itself. The little I saw looked like a lot of gore, jump scares, cheap attempts to be shocking, dumb plot lines, and unlikable characters. Thank goodness this series never succumbed to that dreck. That changed dramatically my sophomore year of high school, when I bought an Xbox from a coworker along with a decent-sized stack of games. Not all of them were exactly great, but in the pile was a copy of Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams. Right away it caught my eye. The cover was so strange for a video game. A woman's face lying sideways, gazing vacantly with some filters that made it look like an old, damaged photo. It was visually striking, but it didn't tell me much. What kind of game was this? On the back, something about a missing wife and horrifying creatures. Clearly it was some kind of horror game, but this was the first time I'd encountered something quite like this in the horror genre. It wasn't trying to shock me or gross me out. It was haunting, subtle and steeped in mystery. Even the manual oozes this atmosphere. The way the paragraphs are slightly off kilter, the weird use of spacing and different fonts, and that heavy filter over the images that makes them look like they're from a heavily scratched up film. At this point, I was too curious to wait any longer. I popped in the disc, watched that opening intro video, which was fascinating by itself.
James. See? Unreal.
And started up Letter from Silent Heaven. Because my copy of the game is the Restless Dreams Platinum Edition, it has two scenarios. The first is Letter from Silent Heaven, otherwise known as the actual game, and the second is Born from a Wish, a short bonus story that was only added to later copies. The selection screen actually warns you not to play Born from a Wish first, and thank goodness I did not. It would have ruined a lot of things. I almost think they should have just locked this option until the players beat the game once, but you know what? Kudos to Team Silent for not treating players like babies and letting us decide for ourselves. The game begins with some of the most aesthetically pleasing shots of a grody, filthy public restroom you're ever likely to see. Why start in the bathroom only to immediately leave? It's all about setting a mood. The camera angles, the filth, the decay, all help to convey the main character James's mental state onto the player. And then there's the wide shot overlooking the lake, and that glorious opening monologue begins.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place.
got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself. A dead person can't write a letter.
I was immediately hooked, and the game doesn't let go from there. There's that long walk down the forest path with near total silence except James's footsteps, only to be interrupted by the loud thumping of something large moving and faint snarling. Progressing further down the path, these noises get louder and more persistent, like something is following and getting closer, but nothing ever appears. The path leads to the graveyard where James meets a young woman named Angela. They have an awkward conversation in which Angela reveals that there's something wrong with the town, but doesn't go into specifics.
This town, there's something wrong with it. It's kind of hard to explain, but...
Is it dangerous?
Maybe. And it's not just the fog, either.
Okay,
It's...
I got it. I'll be careful.
And then he bails on her. I'm sure she'll be fine. She's somewhat less than fine. Continuing down the lengthy path eventually leads to the town itself, which seems empty. A weird, lurching, shadowy figure is briefly glimpsed through the fog and can be tracked by a trail of blood running down the street. Always a good thing to follow. This leads to the first weapon, first enemy, and first fight of the game. Nearly 20 minutes into the game. And that first 20 minutes is what made me a die-hard Silent Hill fan, which in turn has been excellent training in dealing with disappointment. As I was playing through the game, I wondered about all the supernatural things that were happening, and about the true nature of this misty town, which is probably pretty natural, and I'm sure a lot of other fans wondered about too. And the game never actually answered those questions. Oh, there were some hints, mentions of the town's ancient spiritual significance.
You know what I heard? This whole area used to be a sacred place.
But the details given were sparse, and by the very end of the game, I still had only the vaguest idea. Yet I didn't feel cheated, because Silent Hill 2 was never really about that. It was about a handful of characters journeying through their own personal nightmares, and how they dealt with it. In fact, every one of the first 4 games by the original Team Silent are personal stories centered on a single character. Silent Hill 1 is Alyssa Gillespie's story. Silent Hill 2 is James Sunderland's. Silent Hill 3 is Heather's. Silent Hill 4 is Walter Sullivan's. And mild spoiler here, in each game, the person at the center of the story is also the primary force behind the manifestations of the town in that game. The exact mechanics of those manifestations, how they function, is irrelevant. It's not important to the story, it's not important to the game. And that might be a controversial statement. I say this because so many fan discussions about the series seem to revolve around how the supernatural elements of the town work. Countless hours of video and novels worth of text have been dedicated to opposing theories. This wouldn't be an issue if it stayed in the realm of fan theory. The problem is that a lot of this theory has become canonized with later entries in the series by production teams that weren't Team Silent due to their own shaky understanding and lack of confidence with the source material. Not only was taking fan-made rules for Silent Hill's supernatural elements and following and focusing on them in the games unnecessary, it has in fact made the later games significantly worse. That's because of the kind of horror and storytelling that is central to Silent Hill. A kind of storytelling that a lot of amateur internet analyzers, critics, and fans can't seem to wrap their heads around. See, as human beings, we like to have everything spelled out for us. We like to know what the rules and limits are. It's natural. And most of the time, it's good writing to have a well-defined series of rules and stick to them, even if you don't share them with the audience. This is because most of the time, stories have a certain baseline of realism. This includes fantasy stories. Even if there are elves or people who can throw fire, there are set boundaries and a logical progression to everything. But there's a kind of storytelling that ignores all of that. Surreal storytelling. When a story takes a turn into surrealism, it no longer sticks to the rules. Logical progression is thrown out the window and replaced with the bizarre and unexplainable. One of the big influences of Silent Hill was filmmaker David Lynch. Lynch popularized surrealism on film and TV, and was called the most important director of the era by The Guardian in 2007. His works, like Twin Peaks and Eraserhead, plunge the viewer into bizarre worlds where everything on the screen must be questioned. Nothing seen or heard can be taken for granted, and the line is blurred between reality, hallucination, and madness. This experience is a cornerstone of psychological horror, and therefore of Silent Hill, which also repeatedly teases the idea that the characters aren't experiencing what they think they are, and may in fact be insane.
You come here and enjoy spilling their blood, and listening to them cry out. You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you? Oh no. Don't worry. It's just a joke.
Now, if you try and describe or critique a plot that uses a lot of surrealism in the standard internet critic format as a string of interrelated events that flow chronologically, it's going to sound like a mess, because so much of what happens is so bizarre and not interrelated, at least on the surface level. This isn't to say that stories with surrealism are nothing but a string of random events. When it's done right, everything, or almost everything, does have a purpose. Just not in the way a lot of writers and critics are used to. So if someone who was unfamiliar with using surreal elements in a story suddenly found themselves writing for a series that was full of surrealism, they might find themselves lost and confused. What to do? Well, why not make like a popular meme, take elements from earlier in the series and change them up a bit so it's not as obvious you copied. Unfortunately, since you don't actually understand how a story like this works, any changes you make will either make it worse or fail to hide your obvious theft from people familiar with the source material. And that's pretty much where the Silent Hill series has been.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes, got nowhere to run. The night goes on as I'm fading away. I'm sick of this life, I just wanna scream. How could this happen to me?
I'm probably coming across right now as a proper Silent Hill snob who hates all the post-Team Silent games in the series on general principle because they aren't made by Team Silent. Well, let me say that's not it. In fact, I don't even really hate these games. I think every one has at least something good about it, even Homecoming. But boy, are they poor man's versions of the originals, and I wanted to shed some light on why. Things like gameplay bugs and broken combat mechanics are self-evident, but the story problems are a little less clear-cut. That the stories rehash a ton is obvious, but pointing that out doesn't help make a good story. Neither does pointing out continuity issues between games. Continuity in Silent Hill is only slightly more important than continuity in The Legend of Zelda, and only because 3 games in the series are direct sequels to each other. Beyond that, the self-referential circle jerk has done far more harm than good. And before you type your angry comments, remember, the most celebrated of the Team Silent quadrilogy has the least connection to all the others. And you can talk about how well planned out the series is all you want and all the little references, but if you really believe that these games, or even just these games, were all planned out when this game was written, and that no alterations were made to the setting to accommodate the sequels, I know a fellow who would love to talk to you about joining his space navy. Avoiding plot holes and continuity errors is always good, of course, But between games that aren't direct sequels, it's really not nearly as vital as people make it out to be. Because the far more important thing to get right about Silent Hill is immersion. It's about taking you to a place, the town in the title, and making you feel things. The story, the gameplay, everything else is just a vehicle to accomplish that. One big example of a difference in the immersion between the Team Silent games and the Silent Hill games that followed that's really important but few people talk about is camera angles. Getting camera angles right in story-driven video games can be a tough job because the camera is doing double duty during gameplay. Film only has to worry about looking visually appealing and setting a mood. In gameplay, the view has to be clear and steady enough that controlling the character is a pleasant and functional experience while still having the same visual concerns as film. There's no perfect way to do this. Some kind of compromise has to be made. Most games heavily favor controllability, with the camera firmly to the player character's side or back, following the character at a regular pace. Even most story-driven games do this, reserving interesting camera angles for cutscenes. But from its inception, survival horror has focused far more on visuals and mood setting in its camera work than other video game genres normally do. The infamous tank controls in Resident Evil and Silent Hill 1 made for a clumsier but much more atmospheric gaming experience that's far more effective at immersing players and being scary. By the time of Silent Hill 2, the controls had been refined to be a bit more intuitive, while still keeping that same level of atmosphere and visual presentation. If you have the game, try playing through that long walking segment at the beginning of Silent Hill 2, before any of the action begins. Or if you have Silent Hill 3, try the amusement park dream or mall segment at the beginning. Count how many times the camera view changes. You might be surprised by just how often it happens. It seems like a small thing, but it's actually extremely important for a few reasons. The changing view causes mild disorientation, keeping the player from getting too comfortable with what's on the screen. Most importantly, it causes the cutscenes with all their creative camera angles to flow better into the actual gameplay, maintaining immersion. The first 3 games do this extremely well. Silent Hill 4 was more experimental, swapping between a first and third person view and making less frequent use of different camera angles, but it still has some very memorable gameplay moments that use the camera creatively. There's one particular room in a long hallway in the hospital level where the camera starts out in a weird worm's eye view facing the player character after the door is entered, and there's background noise that sounds almost like heavy breathing. The camera swings around as you walk forward, revealing something pretty freaky. I won't spoil it, but scares like this wouldn't be possible without clever camera work. Unfortunately, the post-Team Silent games are a bit lacking in this area. Silent Hill Origins makes a token effort, but if you pay attention, it generally only does 3 camera views. Straight from the back, straight from the side, and straight from the front. A far cry from some of the crazy angles in the other games. After that, the games get downright lazy, sticking mostly to a typical third-person action game view, while more dynamic camera angles are relegated to cutscenes, creating a much stronger line of distinction between gameplay and cutscenes, and significantly reducing the immersion as a result. To quote one of the most popular YouTubers out there, maybe you didn't notice, but your brain did. Later games also tend to have the camera zoomed in closer to the player character, again, like a typical third-person action game. It's a small thing, but it reduces the feeling of isolation while exploring, and also doesn't show off the game's environments as well. And the environments are a really important part of Silent Hill. Think of the town itself as its own character in the stories, helping to reflect the mental state of the central character in each story, as well as making its own commentary on their actions and rendering a sort of judgment based on what it shows and does to people. So the visual failings of the later games, while they may seem small, and while some of these games are still capable of striking visuals at times, significantly impact the experience. And then there's the writing, and here's where the cracks really start to show. The immersion of Silent Hill isn't created with just visuals and sounds, it's created through the story itself, through the motivation that pushes the story forward. And I'm not just talking about the motivation of the protagonists, but the motivation of the player. Because the brilliance of earlier Silent Hill games is that the motivation of the player and the player character are one and the same. And the motivations in each game are established early on and remain clear and consistent, rooting the game no matter how bizarre everything else may get. Let's go through the Team Silent games and look how they use motivation to effectively enhance the immersion. In Silent Hill 1, Harry Mason is trying to find his daughter Cheryl, and that's exactly what the player is also trying to do throughout the game. If you're ever wondering where to go, the answer is always to follow whatever trail Cheryl has left. There's never any question about why Harry would subject himself to the horrors of the town. It's easily understood that he loves his daughter and is more scared of her getting hurt than he is for his own personal safety. In Silent Hill 2, James is trying to get to the bottom of the mystery of the letter from his dead wife, which is also what the player wants to do. The game establishes very early on that James's life is empty and meaningless to him without his wife, so again, there's never any question why he subjects himself to the horrors of the town. He just doesn't care. Silent Hill 3 is a little unusual among the Team Silent games because the motivation actually changes partway through the story. Heather starts out just wanting to get home to her father. She doesn't so much willingly face the horrors of Silent Hill as they descend upon her and she tries to escape them. Then about halfway through, her motive changes to revenge.
When I find her, I
can feel the hatred.
What?
Behind your words, the anger. You plan to kill her, don't you?
I'm sorry, but...
I won't give away why because it's kind of a big spoiler, but once again, all her actions make sense in context. In Silent Hill 4, The Room, main character Henry Townsend is trying to escape the titular room. Henry is honestly the weakest main character of the first 4 leads, but his motivation remains easily comprehensible and provides the player with a clear goal to work towards throughout the entire game. There's never any question why these people would be doing any of the things you, the player, have to do in these games to beat them. Their goals are easy to empathize with, and their actions make sense according to the logic of this crazy nightmare world they've been thrust into. This makes the game's stories immersive on a level many games aren't. Now let's look at the post-Team Silent games and see how they handle protagonist and player motivation. First, Silent Hill Origins, which has an opening that's almost a shot-for-shot carbon copy of the opening of Silent Hill 1, with a few very key differences. Both games begin with the lead swerving their vehicle on a foggy road to avoid a girl. The exact same girl, by the way. The first major difference is that Harry has his daughter with him and Travis is alone in his truck. This becomes extremely important in a moment. The second major difference is that Harry's car spins out of control and wraps around a light pole, while Travis's semi-truck stops safe and sound. In Silent Hill 1, Harry awakens after the accident to see the seat next to him empty, gets out of the car and begins searching for his daughter, and the driving force behind the entire rest of the game has been established. Origins does not establish the motivation that quickly, though. Travis gets out of his truck, Alyssa does a spooky teleportation trick in his truck side mirror that kind of freaks him out, then she shows up in front of the truck, glares at him, and runs away. Then, the game gives the player control of Travis, and what you have to do, the only option you have, is to run down the road after Alyssa. But why? Why would Travis want to do that? There's not really a good in-story reason. He has no idea who this girl is, she's given no indication that she wants or needs his help, in fact, she doesn't really seem to want to talk to him. To make things even better, before this scene there was a voiceover intro of Travis talking on the radio with another trucker during the credits, saying he was running late making a delivery. If you know anything about truckers, their schedules are brutal. So not only does he have no reason to go chasing after Alyssa, he has a very good reason to get back in his still perfectly fine truck and finish his delivery, instead of abandoning it in the middle of the road where something could happen to it that could get Travis fired or cost him a lot of money. The only reasons to chase after Alyssa are because Alyssa is an important character, which a player who's familiar with Silent Hill 1 would know, but not Travis, and because the game gives you literally no other options. This could have been avoided by having Travis wreck the truck, but I guess they felt that would make the opening too similar to Silent Hill 1? I mean, it's kind of already too late for that. And the motivation problems don't stop here. Travis runs down the road for a bit and comes to a burning house.
Not fire. It's smoke. My God.
He runs inside because he hears a scream. You know what? That's fine. Travis is a good Samaritan type. Someone's life is in danger and he's going to save them. It works. So he goes into the burning house, finds charbroiled Alyssa, who he carries out of there. Then he passes out, presumably due to the smoke. He wakes up on a park bench in Silent Hill and wants to find out what happened to the burned girl. Finally, the motivation that will drive the rest of the game is established. Find out what's up with Burned Girl. Why he's willing to risk his own life and limb to do this isn't really explained properly until very late in the game, creating a rift between the player and the character. Worse than that, many of the actions and paths the game forces you into don't make much sense from an in-game perspective. For example, once Travis decides to find Burned Girl, he goes to the hospital where he talks with Dr. Kaufman, who claims no new patients have been checked in the past day, before telling Travis to talk to the receptionist. The receptionist isn't there, and if you try to leave, Travis says he's not leaving the hospital until he finds the girl. Just one problem. After talking to Kaufman, Travis has absolutely no reason to think the girl is in the hospital. The player will know Kaufman is shady, again if they're familiar with the first game, but Travis has no reason to think so. You know what would be the most sensible thing for him to do at this point? Go to the police and report everything. But you can't do that because this is the hospital level and the game is saying you can't leave until you finish it, whether that makes any sense to the story or not. Compare this to Silent Hill 1, where the first conversation in the game is with a police officer, who says she'll get help searching for your daughter as soon as she's able to contact the station. And later in the game you can actually visit the police station as an optional area. No one is there, but it's a nice touch. See, in real life, if a child goes missing, the logical first thing to do is report it to the police. So if the main plot hook in your game is a missing child, you should probably address the police issue in some way. The point of all this is that Silent Hill Origins forces the player to do things that don't feel organic, and that don't match up to what you'd expect a person to do in Travis Grady's situation. The whole reason you do a lot of things you do in the game can be summed up as, because video game. Video game says do this to progress. This destroys the immersion repeatedly during gameplay, making the game significantly less engaging and significantly less scary. Quoting Mr. Plinkett again, maybe you didn't notice, but your brain did. And Origins isn't even that bad compared to what came after. Now, Silent Hill Homecoming, here's where things start to get fun. Breakdown of the killer plot hooks and motivations in this game. The game opens with protagonist Alex being carried through a nightmare hospital on a gurney in a scene that's almost a shot-for-shot copy of the David Lynch film Jacob's Ladder. The creepy doctors who carted Alex in get murdered in the next room by some unseen monster, and the goal becomes to escape. Really basic, kind of reminiscent of Silent Hill 4 and the first half of Silent Hill 3. But after getting out of the room, you very quickly come across a boy named Josh behind a barred door, and your goal quickly becomes chasing the child around the scary hospital, like Silent Hill 1, and 2, and Origins. It's most like Silent Hill 2 because, like Laura from that game, Josh is kind of an annoying brat. But Laura was an annoying brat on purpose and also had information about James's dead wife, giving the player a reason to care about her. With Josh, the game writers seem to think his brattiness makes him spooky, mysterious. I don't like him and don't care all that much is the point. Then it turns out the whole hospital sequence was just a bad dream. Like in Silent Hill 3. It turns out Alex is actually a discharged soldier coming home from war, so his actual first goal after waking up from his truck ride with Silent Hill Origins protagonist Travis Grady is to walk to his house. Kinda like Silent Hill 3, except in that game you had to pass through a nightmarish shopping mall and demonic subway to get to Heather's house. In Homecoming you have to walk down a mostly empty street. After getting home, in no time at all, Alex talks to his mom, who gives him a new goal. Find his younger brother Josh and his dad. Where should he look? Meh, who knows. Do some chores in the basement and see if they turn up. Seriously, doing chores around the house. That's a thing in this game, and it's a new one for the series, so a point for originality, and minus that point for being terrible. So once you're done with your chores, do you get some hint about where Alex's dad and brother are so you can finally get on with it? No. Instead, you get this wonderful moment immortalized so perfectly by another much larger YouTube channel.
Well, that's it.
What's it?
That's it for this house.
This is my house.
You've explored it.
Okay, what did I learn?
I don't know.
But what's my objective?
You don't have any objectives!
You don't have any objectives. I remember reaching this point in the game and having to fumble around lost until I stumbled on the plot thread again. Homecoming fumbled telling you what your motivations and goals are in the game so badly that they just gave up and spelled it out for you on the pause menu like this is Call of Duty or something. And they still managed to cock it up. In Silent Hill Shattered Memories, the driving goal is to find Harry's daughter Cheryl when she disappears after a car crash. Since the game is a remake of sorts of Silent Hill 1, I can't really fault it for the lack of originality, although it does get a little muddled when Harry also seems to have amnesia in this one. Not really going to spend too much time on this one. In Silent Hill Downpour, Murphy Pendleton is being transported on a prison bus near Silent Hill when the bus crashes, and from there he's trying to escape, I guess. He spends most of his time kind of aimlessly wandering around and chasing after a little boy named Charlie. Just like in Silent Hills 1, 2, Origins, Homecoming, Shattered Memories, and the freaking arcade game. Even better, the game basically tells you near the beginning that Charlie is Murphy's son and is dead. So as the player, you have zero reason to be invested in chasing around this illusion or ghost that you already know doesn't actually matter. Furthermore, everything interesting in Murphy's story happened before the game even began. On top of that, the game lets you retroactively determine Murphy's morality for all the stuff he did before the game began by giving you a small handful of choices to make throughout the game that boil down to pet the puppy or drown the puppy. Murphy can be a saint or a psychopath, depending on these choices. So to make sure his personality doesn't clash with the wildly different endings, the game makes him act completely bland most of the time. Consequently, Murphy Pendleton, despite being a maximum security prison inmate, which sounds interesting, is actually a really bland and boring character. To summarize this rather unorganized rant, everyone who writes a Silent Hill storyline needs to focus more on characters and less on metaphysics. Silent Hill is a series full of unpredictable, mind-trippy, supernatural elements that disorient the player and defy explanation. This isn't a mistake, and it does not need to be fixed. Major sources that inspired the Silent Hill games did the same thing. It's supposed to mess with your head. Take that away by making fan theories canon and giving guidelines and rules for how everything works, and a vital part of the tone of Silent Hill is lost. Without an easily comprehensible setting, the characters and their goals are the main source of audience engagement, which is why it's so important to get them right. The characters' goals of the later games are a mess of thin to non-existent excuses to push them from one set piece to another, which is a primary and often overlooked reason why the games feel less engaging and the characters less human and relatable. It's preferable to have a character with an interesting personality, but even a fairly bland character like Henry Townsend can work if the player is able to identify with and care about their goal. In Silent Hill, this comes down to a simple question. Why does this person face down the monsters and terrors instead of running away? Once you have a good answer for that, you've got a foundation for a good Silent Hill story. Just please, please, for the love of all that is eldritch and disturbing, don't make that reason that someone is looking for a child. It's kinda been done to death. That concludes the main portion of the video. I wanted to address a couple of things about the channel and future videos in the outro here. First of all, the elephant in the room. This is very late for a Halloween video. It's been a crazy month and a half or so. I had some computer problems, I had 2 different visits from friends from out of town, I got food poisoning, which was fun, and of course I was working full-time with all that stuff going on. So, I hope you enjoyed the spooky, haunted, early Christmas, late Thanksgiving Silent Hill video. The next big video I'm going to be working on is for Turnabout Goodbyes for the Ace Attorney retrospective. I want to try and get that out by Christmas, so look forward to it around St. Patrick's Day. I really enjoyed the free spooky game reviews I did in October, and I found them pretty easy to make, so I definitely intend to do more of those. They also fit in well with the channel's theme. I probably will branch out beyond just survival horror games and review other games you can download or play online for free. I also plan to put out a couple of quick videos on some more tabletop stuff soon. After the Christmas break, the next big video on the channel will probably be another 40k Armory video, this time on Orc Shootas, and I may have a big announcement early in 2019 about a project I've been working on. That sums it up for now. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell to get notified about every update. Thanks, and have a great day, and happy holidays.
For me, this town will eventually take me. Too late for me. This town will win. Through this fog they came along. Dark creatures singing a terrible song. The rest of the